Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to Procrastinator's Pit Stop. I am sitting here with another amazing guest for you today. Moxin Reza, also known as Moss, is a former data scientist who transformed his first property purchase at 21, over $50 million in developments, and now mentors more than 10,000 investors with data-driven, low-risk property strategies, generating over $20 million in client growth last year and earning features on ABC News and Australian Property Investor magazine. Moss, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for Chris for having me.
Oh, thank you for being here. We have some really interesting ground to cover, but before we do like to have an icebreaker on the show. And the question for you today is, which cartoon character do you resonate with the most, and why?
It's a very interesting question, and I've been pondering over this when I was about to kick off on the podcast. As a kid, I used to watch a lot of Tom and Jerry. That was the cartoon that was very common back in the days. And I resonate a lot with Jerry, not so much Tom. And there is various phases in life that can resonate with that cartoon. As a kid in school, I was bullied a lot. I was the fat one. And I came from that mindset of, hey, education or money is what's going to get me unbullied. And so, I had this thinking and mindset and mentality that I'm a nerd today, but I'll be filthy rich tomorrow. Right. And, that mentality carried. And so I always resonate with Jerry running around from bullies all the time, but then being successful at the very end. And I'm the cheeky one in the family. I'm the cheeky one in the business where I like playing tricks on other people. So, and that too. But then there is always a friendly side to everything that you do. You're not here to harm people. You're here to make life beautiful, bring smiles to faces. And basically that's what it is. That's what you do everything for pretty much. So yeah.
I love that. I love that. And Jerry is being the troublemaker and being bullied and things, and many of us can relate to that. I think Bill Gates coined that though, didn't he? The nerds today are tomorrow's bosses. Was it Bill
Really?
Gates who did that?
I
Was
have
it?
no idea. I have no idea. I think as a kid I read it somewhere, and yeah, it just sat with me. I don't even remember who said it, but I knew that that is something that stayed true to my heart. And now that I look back, did I enjoy studying? Not every time, but it did get me where I wanted to be. Yes, to an extent. I think it was the driving force. And like, look, even in my book. When I wrote my book 2 years ago. It sits on Amazon. It's called Millennial's Guide to Property Investing. I thank the people who bullied me because if it wasn't that driving force, it wouldn't get me to where I am today, right? So I'm super humbled and thankful to everyone, who, put the roadblocks because that was the driving force that kept me going. So yeah.
I love that. I love that, turning the roadblocks into the motivators. Definitely love that. Just sliding into it now. How would you define procrastination, and what does it mean to you personally?
Look, it's always inaction, right? Um, I'll always link procrastination to success and comfort zones. When people, everyone, like, I talk to a lot of people today, and people always tend to see the successful me right now. What they don't see is me being outside of the comfort zone, me taking continuous actions, me not falling back to analysis paralysis, me fixing my mistakes, me owning to my mistakes. All of this stems down to the procrastination, right? Because naturally, people go down this rabbit hole of, hey, should I do this? Or hey, should I not do this? And that inaction costs you everything. It would cost you a beautiful life. It would cost you not having kids. It would cost you not having a marriage. It would cost you not taking decisions in business. It stems down to everything. And so people need to learn to be uncomfortable. People need to learn to step out of the comfort zones. And the only way they can do all of this is by being comfortable and being vague. Like, it's okay to not know stuff and still do it and learn as you go, because that's how, as humans, we've evolved as well, right? So, yeah.
I like that. I like that, and I love how you said that too. Analysis paralysis. Might dig into that in a little bit later. We all know that there's no one sort of cure all for procrastination, and there's no silver bullet. But what's been your secret sauce to giving yourself that extra push when you needed one?
Look, I am being a data scientist. Data is something that comes in quite naturally to me. Numbers, I'm a numbers guy. That's what I always call myself. And so I'll always default back to logic and numbers for every decision, right? I'll try to make it 1 and 0 question, right? And that makes it a lot easier. It makes it a lot simpler. I step out of the gray and I say it's a black and white. Sometimes it gets me into trouble, don't get me wrong, because when it comes to emotions in family, you can't be that logical and you can't, bring the numbers into the game. But I would say 90% of the time, I get to make a decision at least, be it the right or a wrong decision based on the data that is available to me. And I call it, in an investment world, I call it evidence-based investing. And in the business world, it's making fast decisions, learning fast, failing fast, and growing fast, right? So that's what it comes down to. Like, I don't go down the path of, hey, my gut says this, or I need to do this crazy yoga or meditation. None of that crap. It's not that I don't believe. Look, some people get the gift from that, and that's okay. For me, it would always stem down to, okay, what does the data says? What does the logic says? And if the logic prevails, I'll just go ahead and make the decision.
I like that. It sounds pretty simple, and we'll dig into that in a little bit too. Just 'cause I'm curious as to your system for that. But before we get too much further, and I know my audience right now, they're rolling their eyes, and that because they know the question is coming next. Because anybody who ever writes a book on this show gets the same question, and it is, when writing a book, they say it's 98% procrastination and 2% actually doing it. How true is that for you?
Yeah, it takes a lot of dedication. It takes a lot of dedication. Like writing a book, I thought that it would be very easy. I'm a natural writer and a speaker, so I write a lot. And so I was like, well, book writing is easy. I just need to jam pack everything that I've written over the last 5 years, and hey, that's a book, right? And yeah, God, when I started doing it, it was just not easy. And so I had to build a system to be a bit more structured in narrating my story, because the book is literally a monologue of me narrating my story from the childhood to where I am today, and all the mistakes and the f-ups that I've done along the way. And so the system that I ended up taking, which helped me overcome the procrastination, was, and I used to travel, I still travel a lot, so every time I'll jump on a flight or I'm in a plane or I'm waiting at the airport, I have to take my laptop out and start writing, and I'm only writing the book. And that was a really good sort of system in place, because I had people who would ask me, because I was telling everyone this is what I'm doing. I was as announcing to my friends, family within the business. And so every time I would get off at the other airport, the first question that they would usually ask me, how much did you write? How much did you write? And so it was almost like, people keeping me in check and accountable that I am actually spending time on this. So it was beautiful. It was amazing 2 years worth of work that I scummed into the book. The other thing that was quite well was my editor. She joined me quite earlier in the piece, and she was always the guiding force as to, it needs to be this and it needs to be structured like that. And you can't just go around blabbering stuff, and there needs to be some sort of science behind the madness. So yeah.
I love that. The whole editing process. It brings me back memories of grade school or high school English. You have the beginning, middle, and end. But I started in the middle, and then I go back to the beginning, and then I told the end. You can't do
Yeah.
that. Cue Hollywood. I think there were like 5 movies, or no, there's been a ton of movies that did that. Reindeer Games, Swordfish. It's probably more right now. No, I,
It's
I
very,
I like that though.
very true. I think I wrote my end the first for the book, and then I started backwards, literally. So yeah, it's quite funny.
Well, sometimes you got to know where you're going before you know where to start. But
Yes,
what was that
agree.
in math? That was in math. If you have 2 points, it's easier to get the ending point than the starting point, or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. That's true. I mean, if you know where you're going, then the path is what you carve, right? Because at least you know where to get to, right? So yeah, yeah. It's funny how humans do it, right? Sometimes you ponder and think and be like, okay, every decision in life, is it basically you pointing the end first and then trying to get there? Or is it always you're trying everything blindsidedly, right? So yeah,
Well, some people have a plan, and other people just they do like the flip side to what you do. They go with the gut hunches, and they say, "Oh well, I don't know where I'm going, but I'll land, so it's
yeah,
okay." It's
yeah.
many of us like to have a little bit of an assurance that we got enough gas to get there at least, or something, right?
Yes, yes.
Bringing you back to the analysis paralysis you mentioned, actually, I was interested in going into that. You said that you sort of logicked your way through that. Could you give
Mm.
us an example of a business decision that you sort of like? So it's always the bottom line then, like the revenue, when you're talking about logicking through it, or is it
No,
the
it's
way to do it?
every decision you can, as a data scientist, every decision you can bring in quantifiable factors for you to say whether it's a right or wrong. I'll give you an example. Let's say when I was getting married, right? So you can have the list of pros and the list of cons, and you can give them the rating and the numbers and the weightage, and you'd be like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. This girl is a tick. Let's give her an 80 out of 100. Based on the pros and cons as to how well do you fit to her likings and dislikings. And I'm just making it up. I'm hoping my wife is not listening, but it's basically that, right? So when you talk about business decisions, it's always about, okay, not always the bottom line, right? For example, we spend close to $100,000 on systems right now and upgrading our systems. And you don't see an ROI to systems right now because there's a negative impact to the bottom line, actually. But the decision-making process is, okay, does this make my life easier? Does this make my team's life easier? Does this make the customer's journey easier? And how much time are you saving? And if all of that is true, then of course it's an investment in the business that is going to reap benefits because you have more time to effectively spend on better things. So every decision in life, you could potentially rate it, number it, and have a logical answer to it. You wake up in the morning and say, should I eat egg or a cereal? Now you can basically rate the benefits of egg versus cereal in a very mundane fashion and come up with a decision very quickly, right? Now, of course, people don't go down to that nth level, right? But in my head, I'm always doing that. I'm always finding logics and reasons to make that particular decision, and I'll support it with data. And again, it's a terrible way sometimes to do it because, us humans, fall down the possibility of what we call it is the self-conscious bias or self-serving biases, right? And so we'll find the data that supports what we really want, right? And so you need to be really careful when you go down this path of evidence-based investing or evidence-based decision-making of how do you go around doing it while being very independent or indifferent to the decision, right? So you're not actually making a choice and then finding the data to support the choice, right? You're being very indifferent and then making a conscious decision based on that. So, yeah.
It's interesting that you bring that up. It actually segues into an interesting question I had. We all use AI and ChatGPT and DeepSeek and all these other ones now, and some people even use it to make decisions.
Hmm.
Somebody told me though that when you're asking ChatGPT how to do something, I'd like to hear your take on it. When you're asking ChatGPT what to do and how to do it, this person he says to me, but you have to ask it when you're done. How can you be wrong? Because if you don't, then you might get a very one-sided sort of right.
Look, I mean, when you look at ChatGPT, I don't use ChatGPT for decision making purposes, right? Because as a data scientist, I know what ChatGPT is doing is it's basically averaging out all the answers that are out there to the answer that fits the most, right? Because it's based on data, right? There's no logic or decision making behind that model, right? Everything that ChatGPT does is based on the data that is available to them, right? Or available to the software. And so that problem that you're proposing, it could be that 99% of the people took a wrong decision, and ChatGPT would basically tell you that make the wrong decision, right? And so it would never take you down the path of abnormal or like abnormal decision making, right? Because that's where you get the best bang for the buck, right? If I take a step back and think about it as a business owner, right? Two things that holds true to me all the time is, as a business owner, you need to be almost borderline psychotic and passionate about what you do in order to get to where you want to get to. Number two is, if you are that crazy about what you are doing, call it love, call it passion, call it psychoticism, there would always be decisions that 99% would say that, hey, this is the path forward. And that's what the chat GPT would tell you. And that would be that 1% that is an odd one out. That is potentially the right decision because it takes you there, right? And you look at all of these, major players in this space, right? You talk about Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or Alex Hormozy or Gary Vee or Simon Sinek, the people of today and people of, last 2-3 decades, you would always see that there is a time of life or there's a pivotal time in life where they made a decision that if they would have asked that decision to ChatGPT would have said, hey, you're an idiot. Like you shouldn't do that. Right. And so if the theory is that, 99% of the people make the right decision, then the model itself is false, right? Because that's not really how it works, right? So it's important how far do you stretch the model. And look, AI plays a really big part in what we do, and it will keep playing. And robotics is the way of the new world. But I think it's there to support the decision making, not make the decisions for you. Or maybe like make mundane decisions for you, like something that is, hey, should I eat today? Or what should I eat today? Like some of those decisions, yes, that's fine. When you talk about core logical business decisions, where you don't have a lot of data, then ChatGPT shouldn't be making some of these decisions. That's where it's what you are trained as a human to do it, because you should be more capable than a bot to make those decisions.
Interesting. So, but ChatGPT doesn't. So ChatGPT is a large language model. So you're saying it doesn't operate on logic, then?
Well, I mean, it's logic of the world, right? So whatever is like it's database, right? Ultimately, everything is database, right? And so if the data is wrong, the model is wrong. If the data is right, the model is right. Does that make sense?
No, yeah, no, that makes sense. But then how do we know? And this is something that I've had a question with AI for some time now, is that, you know, the rate at which we can have misinformation fly out there. How do you take the data even and say this is the right data to be making a decision?
You can't. Yeah. I think that's what the catch-22 is, right? You publish the wrong information for X number of times, and then people start believing that that is the right information, right? Unfortunately, that's the view of the world, right? That's how it works, right? You go to Google and you type in Google every day for the next 100 years something that's not true. And after that 100 years, or it's not even 100 years, it would probably be like SEO is smart enough to pick it up in 3 months or 6 months, and will start propagating that, hey, this is the new truth. And so if you have an AI based chat model, or a model that is basing its information based on all of these, language based data points, then it would start propagating exactly what you fed the model, right? So yeah, it's just about like, and so when you talk about core decision making, you can't divulge or or give away this decision making process to a bot that is data based, because you don't control that data, right? And so if you're making a decision yourself, you need to make that decision based on the data that you have, rather than based on the data that the model has, right?
And let me ask you, how long does it take you to make a decision using your process usually?
And it's very interesting. So when I used to work in corporate, and I've worked in as a data scientist, I used to work for AIG, QB, some big names in insurance and financial services as well. One of my biggest problem when I was in the corporate, and I was super ambitious when I was in corporate, was that I can process information quite quickly. And so when people, and this was the part of my learning experience as well. I had an executive coach when I was in the business, when I used to work for some of these big companies, and people would, and I used to get all of these feedback. They used to have these 360-degree feedback in these big corporates, right? Where it'd be like, oh, how are you doing, and how does your colleague love you, hate you, etc. And I would always get this feedback that this guy gets very condescending when it comes to decision making, right? And I was like, God, like I'm the nicest guy that I know, and like everyone loves me, but then Jesus, like people really hate me when it comes to decision making. And so they allocated an executive coach to me, and I was working very closely with them. And so what they told me after various sessions of me unpacking what was wrong, and I was not trying to be condescending, was basically that every time someone poses a problem to me, CFO meetings, like, high end board meetings, and I'm anchored to a solution, they'll always say to you, hey, go back, go do your thing in relation to data, go, come up with an answer. And there might be different answers, right? And so I'll go back and did exactly what I did in my head on a piece of paper, with all the data supporting, and I'll bring back the same answer. People will be like, well, look at him. He didn't do anything, didn't perform, still came back with the same answer. And so it started coming out quite condescending, like this guy's a fig jam. He knows everything. Like fig jams as in, I'm good, just ask me, right? And so what I learned as a person when I was, growing in my personal development space was that I need to slow down the data processing speed, and I can't go processing some of this decision making that fast, because it gives a false impression to the other person, or a wrong impression to the other person, that I don't care, whereas I do. And so even in the business world, like now that I have a team of 60 or 62, there are days where I will do exactly that. And I'll be very open and honest about it. Just trust me and do it. And I'll come back and explain and to you, why am I telling you this? And so I have to be very vocal about it. And then there are times where I know it's a wrong decision, but I'll let it happen anyway so that I can see how it turns out, and almost like testing my data or my decision making skills to someone else making a decision. And then I'll say, oh, does it still work? Am I still being genuine? Or I'm just trying to be an asshole in making sure that I know everything, right? So it's that constant battle. And so to your question that you asked originally as to, hey, how fast do you process information? How quick do you make the decisions? I can make the decisions on the fly, but it would feel like this guy is trying to be egotistic, but that's not really the case. I do process information quite fast as well. Yeah, I think it's a blessing and a curse at the same at the same time. So yeah.
No, I like that, and I ask because when people make decisions based on logic, it's a little bit different than when people go with their gut hunches or they go with what they call intuition or even emotional decisions. So it's interesting to see that. Have you ever? I'd be interested to get your take on the 1% rule. Have you heard about the 1% rule?
No, please
So
indulge me.
so it's a decision making process that is supposed to prevent you from going around and round and taking 5 years to pick out a website host for your business website. True story. I did that. So the 1% rule is that you either take the amount of time that it's going to impact you. So if you're going to have a 2 hour a 2 hour and you're reading the menu for more than 2 minutes, it's too much. And yes, I have sat across from somebody and watched a train wreck of them going through. It's a popular chain of restaurants called the Cheesecake Factory, and they have an insane amount of cheesecakes. It's true, but they looked at the menu, like the cheesecake menu, for literally 40.
Wow,
Yeah, it was
Jesus,
it was it was painful to watch.
insane.
But the 1% rule says that however long it's going to impact you, 1% of that should be the maximum amount of time that you use to make the decision. Or in lieu of time, because in business sometimes we don't know how long the decision is going to affect our business, we base it on revenue. If say the cost of a tool is $50 a month, how long is it going to take me to make that $50 back? Is it a week? Is it a month? Is it 2 months? Just using hypothetical examples. And so, based on the amount of time it takes you to earn that money back, you should take 1% of that time to actually make the decision.
Two are interesting. For me, a lot of these, I call them non-valued tasks. When it comes to deciding what to wear, what to eat, I always default to the same thing. And I don't know, I think it's just me being boring me. If I'm going out there and eating a breakfast, I'll always order the same breakfast. If I'm going to a particular restaurant, I'll always order the same dish. And so I don't like change much. I'm very low maintenance when it comes to a lot of these decisions, right? When it comes to business decisions, it's interesting as to how do you quantify of how fast do you get the money back as well, right? I'll give you an example. Over the last 6 years, we have changed our CRM 4 times. That's a lot of change, right? Changing a CRM pretty much every year, right? And the question was, did we recoup the money for the first CRM? Probably, but was the change imminent when we knew from day one? No, no, not really, because sometimes you outgrow the problem, sometimes you outgrow the system, and sometimes it's just for the benefit of thinking futuristically, right? So on the face value, it makes sense. 1% rule, it definitely makes sense, right? But when it comes to business decisions, sometimes it's not just ROI based. I disagree there that it's not just how much money are you going to make out of this particular decision, because sometimes there is like it's almost impossible to identify what the ROI means for this, or is there a business decision that impacts the profitability? Because you might be working towards betterment of your employees or their happiness factor, right? And so how do you translate that towards the revenue, and how much are they contributing towards the revenue, right? So, and then you go down the path of this rabbit hole where you're too bottom line focused, and then you end up not doing some of this stuff because you're like, sure, it doesn't make sense. whereas it totally makes sense, right? I'm always big on breaking the decisions into smaller chunks so that it's easier to make those decisions. And so if you have $1 million decision, you break that decision into $10,000 chunks, and it will just be easier to make those decisions. I'll give you an example. Just last week, I struck the $12.5 million deal for one of the properties in Sydney that I'm acquiring. Now, $12.5 million in a single sitting is a lot for a lot of people, right? Even for myself, right? It's a lot of money. And paying that money right now, I would be like, Jesus, no, I'm not going to do it, right? But the way I've structured it is that I'll pay this money over a 10-year period with only $200,000 a year. And I brought in, 7 of my, associates within the business. And each one of us has to pay like $3,000 a month. And all of a sudden, it's an easy decision, right? And so if I try convincing you, Chris, hey, would you sign up to $12.5 million deal that we have to pay? You'd be like, nah, you crazy or what? But if I say to you, hey, your business is generating $30,000, $40,000 a month or a week, and you just have to allocate $3,000 a month towards this deal that is going to happen in 10 years' time. All you have done is it's the same decision. You have just broken it down into smaller chunks, right? And then it just becomes easier and faster to make some of these decisions. So, yeah, it's a slightly different way of thinking.
I like that though, and I like the chunking of the decisions too, because sometimes you have decisions, and what's funny is the decision isn't even a decision, right? So I had somebody talking to me about decisions today actually that said, "Oh, the biggest decision is I have to decide scaling and, hiring more people." And I was like, "Okay, where's the decision in there? It's not even a question. It's it's so do you think that maybe business owners make that mistake a lot where it's not that they have to make a decision, it's that they have to figure out what the decision could even be first?
Oh, 100%. I think the reason, especially in Australia, right? 80% of the businesses, or I think it's 85% of the businesses, or I think it's bigger than that. I don't remember the stats, but it's a big number. So let's call it 85% of the businesses fail in the first 3 to 4 years is because of, having no business ethics, right? And not knowing what they know. And I was explaining this to one of my directors as well, and he's a young kid who has joined. He's not a young kid; he's still in his mid to late 20s, and he's heading up a mortgage arm of a business. And I was explaining this to him that when you start up a business and you're really successful and you're catching a lot of growth and you're making a lot of money, it's great, right? Because you're a one man show, you'll make tons of money. But as you start scaling, and you have to scale because then you'll kill yourself to the ground because you'll burn yourself to death if you keep doing it yourself, right? Because it's not a business, it's just another job. So when you decide to hire and process industrialize stuff, you would see that your revenue goes up, but your profits go down, right? And that is the time where most of the time people would fail because a lot of the time the business owners, as the profit goes up in the start, their lifestyle goes up too. They don't keep the lifestyle the same, right? And so, if I'm making more money, I'll go buy an expensive car, an expensive house, an expensive girlfriend. I'll start spending a lot of money. And then the question comes down to, hey, I'm going to scale now. And you go towards scaling and you see the revenue flowing in, and instead of 100,000, you're making 200,000 a month. But what you don't realize is your profitability drops because your overheads are going up in disproportion. And so if your lifestyle keeps evolving at that time, that is the poorest example, because then all of these cards that you're building up basically fall, right? And so it's the business ethics that comes to play in majority of these instances where people don't know how to scale. And so that's why they're scared to scale. People don't want to hire more people because they know that their profitability is going to go down, right? Because they don't know for the time that they're going to spend, what are they going to spend on? How are they going to grow the business, right? It's the fear of the unknown. Again, it's, success is killing the comfort zones. And so they're not comfortable killing the comfort zones to become truly successful, right? So yeah, it's interesting. And I see this all the time, every day. Yeah, you need to learn some of this. And unfortunately, like, I've done a lot of studies in my life, and I'm an MBA and I did CPA, etc. All of these studies, they don't teach any of this in any of the education, right? The true business ethics of how all of this works. They'll talk about cash flow and they'll talk about financials, but they'll not dumb it down for a normal business owner to understand that this is how the scaling works, or these are the decision points that would happen, or these are the milestones that you would hit, and this is the decision that you will need to make. And so naturally for people, when they say, oh, I have a decision to scale or not to scale, I was like, that's not a decision. Like, that's not even a question. That's just you evolving. And so the question here is, do you want to evolve or not, right? So why would you ever say no to that, right? So yeah.
Well, I mean, that a lot of times when people are faced with that decision, it's because they've hit revenue and they've hit like that ceiling, right? So whatever that ceiling might be, and they just can't seem to break through it, and that's when they have to scale. The issue is if I'm hearing you correctly, is that ceiling. Let's say the ceiling is 50,000. They scale now they're at 100,000, but their profitability is at the same or maybe just a little bit above where it was before.
Yeah, because with scaling, the issue is not just about getting more revenue in the door. It's also about hiring more people and increasing the overheads, right? And it's always the horse and the cart story, right? So what comes first, right? Do I hire more people first, or does the revenue comes in first, right? Now, if you bring in the revenue too fast without having the fulfillment in place, then you would sacrifice the customer experience, right? And if you hire too many people first and there's no revenue in, you'll kill yourself down to the ground because you're spending too much money. And so it's a fine balance of how do you do both at the same time. And it's not a tap, right? A lot of people, use this as an example of a tap where I'll have a little bit of revenue and a little bit of overheads and a little bit of revenue and a little bit of overheads. That's not how it works, right? It's not. It's a lot of overheads and a lot of revenue, and a lot of overheads and a lot of revenue, right? And so you need to be ready to take that hit on. And so you need to have money to burn, money to spend. And again, when you're going down the path of scaling, you don't know sometimes what is it going to take you from A to B. And so let's say your ceiling is 100,000 and you're trying to get to 500,000 in a month's revenue. You don't know how much are you going to spend on marketing and sales in order to break that threshold, right? And so a lot of the times people fail is they go down the path of scaling and they're trying to figure out how to scale and they burn through a lot of cash and shit. They run out of money, right? Like shit, what happened? Right. And so like it's a truest problem that the business owners face. And again, it's the scare of unknown, right? I was talking to, this podcast a couple of months ago and they were discussing about marketing, and we're big on marketing as well. We have a team of 28 that does marketing for us. And I said, marketing is like an ATM. If you knew there is an ATM that exists in the world where you put in $1, and it spits out $3, and it spits out $4, and it spits out $5. The question is not so much how much would you put in, right? Because it's always doubling or tripling your money, right? So of course that, right? So marketing is that machine. The problem is how many times you have to push in that $1 before it spits the second dollar, $2 out, right? Sometimes it's 10, 15, 20. Sometimes it's $100 you put in and it spits out nothing, right? And so you need to be really careful on, again, coming back to business owners are borderline psychotic of knowing that this works. And so you keep pushing in that dollar into the ATM with the hope that this is going to spit $2 very soon. But it's not so much hope, right? I'm simplify this too much. It's not hope. It's, again, evidence-based investing. It's evidence-based decision making. It's, continuous improvement, knowing that, hey, we are going down the path of scaling and I'm testing out various different things. So yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting. What just went through my head when you were describing that is what I used to see in Costa Rica and different casinos in Canada and the US too, is they go to those slot machines and they start feeding in those dollar bills every like 10 minutes. But no, I mean, marketing's got to be a little bit more of a science, data driven,
Yes, of
that,
course.
than that.
No, definitely. Look, 100%. But using this as an example is that you would always get an ROI if you do the marketing right. But it's the fear of unknown, because people always feel as a business owner that if you're going to spend money on marketing, you don't see the returns instantaneously, right? Sometimes because it's a brand play or it's a long game and it's not performance marketing, right? Me jumping on a podcast and paying $100 for a pod, I don't know where the ROI is going to come from. Might be one person that might listen to this podcast in 4 years' time and becomes a customer, and that's my ROI, right? For example. And so if I'm doing like 100 of these podcasts a month, and I'm spending like $1,000 on each podcast, and that's $1 million. I don't know when the ROI is going to come, right? Because I can't, link that to it, right? It's always the fear of unknown. And so a lot of the times business owners, when they are going down the path of scaling problems, it's always two things. One is, how do I market this so that I can grow this better? And two, where do I need to grow my operations for it to be effective? Is it the sales team? Is it the fulfillment team? Is it, the transport? Is it the people on the ground? Is it customer service? Where does the team needs to grow for? And once you get that balance right, the sky's the limit, right? You grow really, really fast.
You raise an interesting question too. Now that we have AI and we're supposed to enhance and not replace, but everybody tends to want to replace instead of enhance. Do you think that it makes sense for businesses to have totally automated AI kind of sales agents, or do you think that we always have to have that human factor?
Look, it's a very double-edged sword, right? We are testing out AI bots in our business as well, especially in the appointment setting side of things. And gosh, like you can't tell, once they're learned enough, you can't tell that these people are bots. They talk and speak like you and don't know exactly what to say, right? Replacing the sales process with this, there would be times where there would be some industries where, of course, it makes sense, right? Whether it be, household equipments or, it's just basic stuff, right? But where there is, decisions that are life and death dependent, then you wouldn't hand it out to AI just as yet, because you don't know how dirty can AI get in order to win that business. Does that make sense? Because it comes down to teaching the AI, you know. And so if you teach the good and the bad, of course, right? They'll try to close the sale every time, right? So yeah, it depends on how far do you take it. Like, it's the technology. You can do the good and the bad at the same time, right? With that same piece of technology. I know someone told me that, Tony Robbins was, doing his, those events in Australia. And so every time they were doing events, people who have been to Tony Robbins before, they'll usually get a call from their team saying, "Hey, we are doing another event. You should join us, rah rah." He said this time it was Tony Robbins calling himself. I was like, it can't be right. So it was, they had the AI chatbot for Tony Robbins' voice, calling people saying, "Hey, it's Tony Robbins. You should come and join me." So like, it's a cool trick, right? But how far do you take this is the question. So yeah.
Interesting for sure. Well, Moss, this has been a great conversation. A lot of great insights and things we talked about. We are coming up pretty close to the time. Is there anything you wish I would have asked but didn't ask, or anything you feel we should have covered but we didn't cover today?
No, look, I think all of this comes down to, as a business owner, when you're talking about building, creating wealth or building lifestyles or creating generational wealth, it comes down to what do you truly enjoy doing. And so for me, when I was exploring my why, there was three passions that, really stuck out. One was data, one was the love of teaching, and the third one was property at that time. And so my business basically revolved around me bringing these three things together, right? And so investor partner group of the business is everything to do with property investing because, I bring all of these three things together, through my podcast or my book. I have a podcast called Help Me Buy Property Podcast. My book, it all basically stems down to teaching, going into data in a lot more detail, and then property as a tools and means to grow wealth. As I've evolved, I've realized that there's also a fourth component, which is my love for an entrepreneurial journey and the give that you get of building scalable and like scalable businesses. And so over the last sort of 2 years, I've gone from running 6 businesses to like 12 businesses. And they're all doing between 6 to 7 figures and some are close to hitting 8 figures. And so that's the fun of, hey, this is cool. I think I can do this. And so I can see now how some of these big players operate and big players work, right? And so when I was first starting, and again, this is a journey of unknown. When I was first starting, I didn't know about a lot of this stuff, and so I always used to think about all of these big successful people and be like, geez, like they are, yes, they've worked hard for it, but it must be luck on their side, or they must have born with a silver spoon, or hey, they would have a lot of money to start off with. But that's not really the case. It's just about identifying what you truly love, giving it everything that you have, and then improving slowly and gradually every day. Basically that's what it is. Everything else is just like, it's just noise. You cut it off and you just keep focusing on what you do the best. So yeah.
I love that. So profound and It reminds me of what somebody else sort of summed it up as, you know, strive for happiness first because happiness may or may not lead to success, but it more often than not, but it does lead to success more so than success leads to happiness.
Agree. Yeah, beautiful words.
Yeah, I wish I could remember who said it now. This is not mine, but it's a good quote. It's a quotable. I'll figure it out and put it in the show notes. Don't blame me. Just before we go, Moss, what's the best way for our listeners to go ahead and reach out if they have questions or learn more?
Yeah, look, we have a website called Investor Partner Group, investorpartner.com.au. You can always hit me on my socials. I have a YouTube channel called Australian Property Academy, where I use that channel to help people understand how Australian property market works. You can always reach out to me on my email, which is moss@helpmebuy.com. It doesn't have to be property related. If you're looking for any help, support in relation to business, or you have problems in scaling up the businesses, I'm always up for a chat and keen to see as to what other people are doing as well.
Love that. Thank you so much, Moss. And to all our listeners, don't worry, we are going to have that in the show notes for you, so you don't need to worry about getting a pen and paper. Just once again, Moss, thank you so much for being on the show. It's a real delight. To all our listeners, thank you again for tuning in. And just remember, if you can't find that inspiration or motivation for yourself today, maybe just go out and try to be that motivation or inspiration for someone else. And we'll see you again next time.
Thank you very much, Chris.